Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, MacBook reviews are out. How fast is that $1,000 memory from Corsair? MSI GS330 Shadow and GamingDock reviewed. NZXT drops a clean case while DARKCOOL goes steampunk. And why did my USB ports die? All that and more coming up next on TWiCH.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
Bandwidth for TWiCH is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
It's time for TWiCH's annual audience survey, and we want to hear from you. Please visit twit.tv/survey and let us know what you think. It only takes a few minutes, and your anonymous feedback will help us make TWiT even better. We thank you so much for your continued support. twit.tv/survey.
This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 310, recorded 4/9/2015. MacBook reviews are here. Welcome to TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, TWiCH's weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most informative, most helpful, most engaging, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, most pernicious hardware commentary available on the interwebs today. I'm Patrick Norton, joined, as always, by Mr. Ryan Shrout, who is going to be a father, as we found out last week, or I found out last week. I think the rest of you already knew. I want to give a shout out to Zach for putting the picture of my reaction up, which I got to get the high-res version of that because it was particularly epic, even for my facial expressions. Ryan, I'm going to guess that you were not particularly tempted by the gold, silver, or space gray of the new Apple MacBook. Would that be an unfair...
I've always wanted a space gray something. I don't think that's a machine. It's not a machine for me. One is I'm not in the Mac ecosystem, right? I'm not used to using those types of devices. And based on some of the reviews that actually started to filter out today, looks like even if you are in that ecosystem, it may not be an optimal choice.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I was joking back and forth online. I took a picture of like a yerba mate, which is a gold sort of caffeinated strange beverage, and my Noveski coffee cup. And I was like, okay, maybe these will sate, because for some reason I'm fascinated. Like I do not wear gold jewelry. I'm not a bling kind of guy, but the gold MacBook fascinated me. Like I wanted the precious, and a friend of mine was teasing my friend Anthony Carboni on the Twitters, and then the first couple reviews showed up this afternoon. The MacBook starts shipping Friday, April 10th. That's tomorrow, 12:01. About 5.5 hours, 6 hours from when we record the podcast. The pre-orders for the Apple Watch go up. Early reviews for the Apple Watch are out too. But the first couple reviews went up on the Wall Street Journal and on Ars Technica. And you're looking at Joanna Stern over at the Wall Street Journal. And if you can't read the title, or if you're listening rather than watching, the Apple MacBook review, the laptop of the future isn't ready for the present. Are you willing to give up battery life and convenience to own the most beautiful laptop ever? It's a great piece of writing. As somebody who studied literature, I think it's a fantastic piece of writing, and it's a good product review because it's ahead of its time, right? The single USB Type-C port and a headphone jack is it. That's all you get in terms of connectivity. There's like an $80 dongle if you want to get serious about adding things to it. There's a $20 USB 2.0 type adapter, USB adapter you can pick up for it. But this is a $1,300 laptop, and I believe Ars Technica said it performs somewhere in between a 2011 and 2012 MacBook Air.
That part of it, like, we knew ahead of time. Like if somebody in the review cycle had asked me, I would have said, well, I know how that process performs. It's not the first time we've seen this processor. And I personally had done a performance evaluation of that CPU that shipped basically right after CES, the Yoga 3 Pro, which is a very similar device to what the MacBook is. It differs in some ways, but it's very similar in design. So we knew that the performance of this part, the Core M processor, which is the Broadwell Y CPU, is lower than what you get with Haswell or even Ivy Bridge because of the higher TDPs that those things operate at. So it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise to these guys that this was going to be the case, unless they thought Apple was going to magically alter the performance of an Intel part, which
well, they have done that in the past, right? You know, back in the day before Apple started using Intel processors, they were known to do things like use very obscure benchmarks that were highly optimized by Apple's engineers for performance versus bone stock, tests running on an Intel part, just to prove that by running really optimized software on your part versus really crappy software on the other guy's part, that the other guy's part could be slower. And I will say, I'm going to say this right now. You know, you've used Lenovo with the Core M. I've used the ASUS with the Core M. You know, for the vast majority of things you're going to do, it's fine. You know, if you're web browsing, if you're, you know, working, you know, with basic Excel spreadsheets, if you're doing, you know, everyday computing tasks, you know, nobody was thinking, gosh, that new MacBook, that's really what I want to do video editing on. So, you know, before anybody, you know, emails or tweets or hunts me down somewhere in the bowels of Richmond to beat me with a stick. But, you know, it's an interesting observation. Physically fit and finished by all assessments, it is everything you expect from an Apple laptop. It is fantastic. Like I said, the gold is gorgeous. I don't know why I think the gold is gorgeous, but I'm not alone in that assessment. You know, the Ars Technica review says it is running faster than Lenovo's Yoga 3 Pro. But of course, compared to the latest MacBook Airs and Pros, you know, if you need performance, if you want to play around with photo editing or, you know, minor video editing and stuff, you should definitely be looking at a MacBook Air or a Pro. You know, but in terms of, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think in like the Verge review, they talk about, you know, if you're doing browsing and stuff, it's fine. But if you do something like opening up a fairly large photo album on it, even if you're not doing photo editing, but opening up a large photo album, you're going to wait a little bit for it. And it's something that they weren't used to doing in other laptops and notebooks they've reviewed. I mean, I think it's a mindset. It's a mindset where when you see a new product, you expect it to be a little faster, right? We don't expect leaps and bounds faster anymore. We used to expect that. Now we just expect it to be a little faster. And here we're seeing it a little slower. And I think it's taking people aback a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big problem with that is the sort of memory performance. Although, you know, we've argued that memory performance isn't that big a deal in terms of, like, say, overclocking memory and stuff. But if you look at some of the single core benchmarks, the memory the memory performance on the MacBook, the 2015 MacBook is lagging in a fairly significant way.
That can affect your graphics performance more than anything else, right? Because remember, it's integrated graphics, so memory bandwidth is more important for processors that have integrated graphics than those that don't use integrated graphics by far. And considering this is a super high, it's not a super high, but it's a high resolution screen, it has to drop more pixels than the previous MacBooks did as well. So you have a slower processor with less memory bandwidth trying to drive more pixels. It's kind of an equation that adds up to it just feeling like a slower part.
Pain's probably exaggeration, but yeah, I mean, 2304 by 1440. Ars Technica said it. You know, it's funny. Like the built-in Retina display, you can optimize to scale it for the display, which I think a lot of people are going to do. They made it really clean. I got to say they did a great screen cap on Ars Technica that allows you to basically see what the interface for that adjustment looks like. You know, it's. They noted that performance was good in 1280 by 800 mode, but, quote, sometimes animations drop frames in 1440 by 900 mode with lots of windows open. Incidentally, 1280 by 800 is the screen resolution used by the white plastic MacBooks of yore. Aside from that and the MacBook 8 model identifier, these laptops have very little in common. You know, you're not going to be driving a 4K monitor, which I don't think most people buying a MacBook are thinking about doing. But it's certainly gorgeous.
That's only in the iMac that the 5K display exists. Okay.
Yeah. No. I was just laughing that they pointed out the resolution was same as the white MacBooks. Battery life is not spectacular. But then again, most of the core M parts we've seen, because the designs are emphasizing thinness and thinness and lightness. There's not a huge amount of battery inside of the case. There is no upgrade opportunities in this. The RAM, the SSD, everything is soldered to the motherboard inside of the MacBook, the 2015 MacBook. I will say, I gotta say, I'm really kind of getting behind the idea of the Type-C port. I don't particularly want to buy $100 worth of adapters, or even a $20 adapter to be able to plug a thumb drive into it.
Right.
And obviously Type-C parts are going to come in stock, but needing to purchase an additional adapter to be able to connect something to the MacBook and power it at the same time is not particularly awesome. Battery life, I think they got 658 minutes, which is actually, that's pretty good when you realize that the X1 Carbon was like 659 minutes. The Dell XPS 13, the 2015, is 532 minutes. 658 minutes is still better. Is probably almost an hour and a half longer than the Dell XPS 13, the 2013 version that I use on a daily basis. So that I've comfortably gotten 7 to 10 hours out of that with light use, without having the monitor turned all the way up and stuff. Much better than the Yoga Pro 3, at least in Ars Technica's testing, which came out at like 316 minutes. So, that's us, with not, it's not your battery test, which is particularly cruel or realistic, depending on your point of view. But you're looking at more than double the life of a Yoga Book 3, more than the Surface Pro 3. So that's a good thing. It's solid. It's right there with the X1 Carbon. So all in all, I don't think anybody, if you were a power user and looking at this, you probably want to think twice. If aesthetics are your greater concern, this is an easy choice. And you will be buying adapters. If you never plug anything in your computer, it's probably not going to bother you. It is pricey compared to the Core i3 MacBook Air. It's $300 more than the Apple MacBook Air. It's like $1,300 for the Apple MacBook. That's not twice is it's another $500 more than a Dell XPS 13. So it's interesting. It's an interesting part. I think Ryan summed it up. If you expected something newer to be faster, you'll be disappointed. But I guess the battery life's better really than I thought it was at first. So some people get really irked about the battery life.
So do you want to buy one?
No. Yes, maybe. I need to, it's funny for Tech Thing. We need somebody running OS 10 because such a huge percentage of our audience runs OS 10. But now I'm thinking more of a MacBook Air. Although, who knows? Maybe I'll lose my mind or buy a lottery ticket and be all about buying the new MacBook. Although I got to say the MacBook Air at $1,000 is starting to look like a pretty serious bargain, but not available in gold. While we're talking about Apple, the Apple Watch in-store preview and online pre-order begin Friday. Yay. Actually, 5 or 6 hours from now, 5.5 hours from now, 5 hours and 27 minutes from now, you'll be able to pre-order the new Apple Watch. Early reviews on that. It's kind of funny. They tend to tend to vacillate. I've noticed between breathless and kind of not frustrated isn't the right word, but a lot of people, again, it's an Apple product, fit and finish are flawless. I'm a little terrified that they didn't put the Ruby on the inexpensive Apple Watch, in part because I'm thinking about picking up one to review on Tech Thing and of course here on This Week in Computer Hardware, but I break screens and it's going to be an expensive piece to replace. It's interesting. A lot of people, I've seen everything from this is the only watch you should buy to, wow, what an amazing interface. Hope the apps catch up. People have had great success making calls with it. Apparently, the microphone inside of it is fantastic, but you may have to kind of hold the watch up to your ear to be able to hear the other side of the conversation. It is very much an extension of the iPhone. Duh. I'm kind of curious to look at. It's a little early for HomeKit in a lot of ways, but it could make a really compelling sort of remote control extension, because what I need in my life is one more way to control my home theater system. But yeah, you can, probably the orders will already be online by the time everybody except for the people listening to the live recording going on that. Yeah, I'm curious. I'm kind of curious to go put one on, because I'm really curious to actually see with my own eyes the difference between the 38 millimeter and the 42 millimeter screen on those. Because 4 millimeters doesn't sound like a lot, but it looks like a lot when you see them side by side. And of course, I have giant, ridiculous wrists, as Leo noted in a podcast we did on TWiCH last week. So that's always a concern for me. It should be large enough to get around my wrist, but whether or not it'll be comfortable, I'll be curious. Yeah, Web7699 in the chat room says, I think most say it's the best smartwatch right now, but maybe not worth this generation, which is, an interesting analysis. It's amazing. It's leading edge. Don't buy it. Huh? Which I guess is kind of like a lot of beta products when we start looking at them.
Well, that's kind of what the review said of the MacBook.
Yeah.
I would say that my just kind of looking at the ecosystem and people that are interested, it looks like there's not a huge amount of excitement for the watch. I know several people that are like, oh, I'm definitely going to get it. And I had, like my father-in-law ask me, hey, have they sent you that new watch yet? And somebody who never really asks me about technology. So it's one of those things that I think it would potentially be more interesting for the mainstream person than the techie, but I don't think that it's going to get to that same crowd. I don't know. As somebody who uses a smartwatch every day, I still see there's a lot of people that complain about the ADHD functionality that it creates as well. So
it's interesting. They've done a lot of stuff to allow some really intriguing ways to interface with it. To the point where the sort of learning curve on all these different ways of controlling the watch, manipulating the watch, are just that. They're a learning curve, which you could say there was with the iPhone, right? Or the early Android phones, or any of a number of, Windows CE phones back in the day. I'll be really curious to see, the software and how people feel about it once it starts shipping on the 24th. Battery life, it seems the general consensus is that you're barely going to get a day out of it. And that's the thing that I find the most worrisome. Especially if you're, going full out for the Apple Watch edition and you're dropping you're dropping 10 grand on a watch. This is not the kind of thing you're going to be running around with a, Anker extra, or maybe you will be running around with an Anker, an adapter in your Anker 12,000 milliamp hour battery, like I'm always running around with to connect my phones and other devices too.
Strap the battery to your forearm with a little cord watch, and you're fine. What could go wrong with that?
So cyborg. Oh my goodness. MSI GS30 Shadow review and GamingDock. How is MSI's latest battle laptop?
Well, this is an interesting thing because it's not just a laptop, right? It is it's a laptop with a docking station that has a discrete GPU in it, right? So this is one that they showed off at CES. And the idea is grand in nature, right? Where you have this thin and light notebook. It's a 13.3 inch 1080p screen there. It's, it's 3/4 of an inch thick. It only weighs 2.5 or 2.6 pounds. And then you attach it to that docking station that you see there. That is, I've never been able to use this phrase in any other article or story frame, but it's about the size of a bread box. And inside of it, it has a 450 watt power supply, a discrete GPU. It also has a pretty bad speaker in it, but it also has a room for a 3.5 inch hard drive as well. And then it's got connectivity options like USB 3.0 and Ethernet and stuff like that. So when you dock it, it kind of acts as both a kind of like your typical docking station, as well as supplying this discrete GPU. What's interesting is that the connection between the laptop and the docking station is actually a physical by16 PCI Express slot, essentially. There is, like, if you open up this little port on the back, it's basically the length of a by16 PCI Express connection, and there's like a female receptacle on the docking station. You place it on there, you pull a little lever, and it kind of latches it in place. Now the downside to that, because it just uses PCI Express essentially, is that the system has to be turned off when you dock it, right? And it has to be turned off when you undock it. Otherwise, you're doing you don't want to randomly remove PCI Express devices from your system, which is what this would be, emulating more or less. The problem is so that, like, the idea of I have this thin and light Ultrabook style laptop that I can take with me everywhere, and then I come home and I dock it and I can play my games. The idea has always been grand and what we've all been kind of wanting to go to. Sure. But the problem is this laptop by itself is not a great laptop. Mm-hmm. It's nice, right? It's okay. It's built very well. It's fairly thin. It's got backlit keyboard. The touchpad is nice. The screen is decent. 1080p matte finish. The problem is twofold. Like it uses the processor uses a Core i7 4870HQ, which is a quad-core hyper-threaded part with a 47-watt TDP. Now the reason you've probably never heard of that processor being used in a 3/4 of an inch thick laptop before that's a 13-inch screen. And that's because that's a hot processor to try to stuff into this type of space. Because of that, the fan on this thing gets loud, like way, way, way too loud. Not even when you're gaming, but just kind of when we were doing like our Wi-Fi test, right? All it's doing is browsing the internet, and the fan cranks up to be kind of obnoxiously loud. And then to go along with it, battery life is also pretty low. I think we got 3.16 hours on our battery test. Compare that to 7.95 hours on the Dell XPS 13, right? So a fairly dramatic difference there you'll find. So that's kind of the laptop part of it. The docking station part, if you can get, it's kind of just like a black box that sits on your desk. So if you can get past the aesthetics of that, it works fine. You can doesn't include, but you can install rather a 2-slot graphics card that can work up to 400 watts or so. So that should be able to support anything essentially except like a 295X2 today. And it just works, right? When you turn on the machine, it shows up as a new graphics card. You install a driver, and boom, you're off and running. Now, while it is docked, you cannot use the embedded screen on the laptop. And I believe some of the accessories like the Ethernet connection get disabled as well in favor of the Ethernet connection on the docking station, which kind of makes sense, right? You just you do that. The idea is you've got your keyboard and mouse and speakers and headset or whatever plugged into the USB ports on the side of the docking station. When you plug it in, you're there to use those devices. So it works. But the 4870HQ processor, they included it because they didn't want people to complain about the bottleneck of this system being the CPU. So if you installed a GTX 980 or GTX Titan X or something crazy like that in this docking station, but you were limited to a dual-core hyper-threaded processor that was typical of fitting into an Ultrabook form factor, you'd probably see complaints about, hey, this is terrific, but if you use too powerful GPU, you're going to be CPU limited in some areas. So they wanted to use the highest end Haswell processor that they could get their hands on for it. And it just caused these other areas of battery life and heat and noise to become an issue. And that noise is still actually kind of an issue when you have it docked and you're playing, the games through the discrete GPU on the docking station itself. Because this has to sit on your desk. It's not like something can go on a floor. I guess technically you could put it on the floor. You could put it in a cabinet if you wanted to do that, but I don't think that's a very likely scenario. The other thing I have is, will this be a one and done product, or is this an up type thing, right? Are they going to make another machine that uses the same connector on the back that connects to this docking station, making the docking station more valuable over time, right? And say you spend $1,200 or $1,300 on a Skylake laptop from MSI that doesn't have the same issues in terms of heat and noise with the processor, but you can still dock it and use your discrete card. That would be something I would love to see. But the problem is, this is the first generation of it. We have no idea what their commitment is to this in the long run. Obviously, they've said they're committed to it, and that they have other machines in the pipeline that will utilize the same gaming dock. But until we see them, it's really hard to give you a definite answer. You're going to pay $89 for this combination, which is the laptop plus the gaming dock. It does not come with the graphics card. It does come with the power supply, but it does not come with the graphics card. So I think you could buy the laptop by itself for $14.99. And so you're basically paying $400 for this dock with power supply, which is, it's not absurdly expensive, but I think the Alienware version, the, what do they call their graphics amplifier or something, it's $300 to their laptops. So it's in line. It's a little bit higher. I don't know. I still think that there is a place for this. If this system had been done well and perfectly, right? I still think a position for this. Some people debate you should really just have two different systems anyway. There's no reason for you to spend more money to kind of combine these into one thing, even if they do it perfectly, right? It still makes more sense to have two. I tend to disagree with that. The ability to just kind of pick up your laptop, take everything with you on the go, and not have to worry about, you know, do I have data on multiple machines and moving it back and forth and syncing everything, you know, stuff like that.
The cloud is for.
But it never quite works as perfectly as they say it should. So,
no.
Place for this. This is just not the greatest implementation of it. Like I said, if they come up with a Skylake version that is, you know, has no noise issues, has no heat issues, still connects to the same interface. Maybe they make a new dock that's like maybe a little bit thinner. Maybe it's external through a PCI Express cable, so you can kind of put it out of the way. I think there's room for improvement, but this is not a slam dunk product as it is now. Which is disappointing because I came away from CES really thinking I was going to love it, not knowing, you know, some of the drawbacks of the laptop itself.
Interesting. I didn't really expect you guys to get this in for review. Maury titled and wrote this up. The Corsair Dominator Platinum DDR4 3400 memory review, and I'm giggling because I'm looking at my Corsair Value Select, you know, in the machine I'm running right now. What did Maury think of the $1,000 memory? I mean, and we should point, when we talked about this earlier, we painted it very, this is for people who are like liquid nitrogen overclocking, you know, mayhem monsters. You know, none of us in normal life need 3400 megahertz DDR4, or maybe you do.
Well, you were kind of right the last time we talked about this, in that really chances are nobody that listens to what we have to say should probably buy $1,000 memory, especially if it's only 16 gigs of $1,000 memory. Because I mean, the truth of the matter is, it's impressive in terms of what it's been rated at and what it's capable of doing. 3400 megahertz is a huge milestone to hit, especially not just that this is some overclocker with LN2 hitting it, that this is a product that Corsair is selling right now. It's been validated with a very specific motherboard, and that's the motherboard we use to test it, and that's why it has the special orange coloring to it. It kind of matches the motherboard that goes along with it. This is for that kind of competitive person. You could improve your performance in your system numerous other ways with $1,000 than this. I mean, I think Josh pointed out yesterday there was a 64 gig DDR4 memory kit that you could get for about $600, right? That obviously wasn't this fast, but was 64 gigs. So I think that would probably be a better use of money than getting the higher frequency, right? We talked about that before. System memory is not going to change that much in terms of real world performance on processors that don't have integrated graphics. So obviously this system doesn't have integrated graphics, anything that installs DDR4 today. So it's neat to look at. It's neat to look at the benchmarks of. It's one of those, it's kind of like the $1,000 Intel Extreme Edition processors. Not many people are going to buy them, but they're neat to ooh and ah over in terms of benchmarks and graphs and stuff like that. And this definitely still fits the bill there. So go check it out, unless you have a very specific desire for the world's fastest memory modules. I would probably invest that money elsewhere.
That pretty much sums it up. It's cool. It's shiny. You don't need it. Some cases are designed to divide the audience. Some cases are not. I'm going to say the NZXT probably is in the not dividing the audience. This is a really nice looking, very simple mid tower from NZXT, the S340. Sebastian Peak wrote it up at PCPro.com. I gotta say, one, the photography is really nice. Just want to point that out. Well, it's not that you guys don't normally take really nice pictures of cases, but for some reason, I feel like somebody got a new camera and everything's really popping on this one. White case, black accent on the top, really clean access to USB 3.0 ports. It looks to be, a clean, simple case. Is it a full ATX case or is it a mini ATX?
It's full ATX.
Okay.
Yeah, it can fit a full-size ATX. It's not humongous in there, but if you go into the second or third pages, you'll see where the system is built into it. It's got amount of space. I think it looks a little bit smaller because of how big the side window is. Probably. Yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, it's clean layout, plenty of room behind. I mean, as I slowly try to embrace adult, thoughtful cable management as I get older, I got to say they left a lot of room in the back of the case for you to be able to hide your cables behind the motherboard. Clean layout. I like the power supply install where it kind of brackets it in place inside of there. Noise levels were good, not great. Is that fair to say? Oh no, I'm looking at the it's pretty much in line with everybody else. Maybe 2-3 decibels, 4 decibels, 5 decibels higher than the best scores from the Raven RV05, but pretty much in the neighborhood in terms of temperatures and noise levels. I should also point out that I was looking at CPU temperatures and thinking dBs. It is extremely quiet. It doesn't cool as well as the Revo, but it is one of the quietest cases out there. Math is hard.
Numbers are difficult. I agree. I think I've become more impressed with what NZXT has done in recent years with case design. They kind of like Corsair was a couple years before that, kind of the new up and coming group that is doing some interesting, innovative things like removing 5 1/4 inch bays, putting LEDs on the back port connection so you can see when you're plugging stuff in the dark, and I think it's worthy of praise, especially if we're talking about a case here that's like what, $70.
Yeah,
right? There's some really neat stuff.
I mean, in relative, sub $100 cases, and probably still anytime you're paying under $50 for a case, you're looking at sharp edges, you're looking at really awkward design, maybe cable management is an afterthought if it was a thought at all. Yeah, I'm with you. NZXT is doing good stuff. Really interesting review up on hardocp.com. Steve Lynch wrote this up for them. The DARKCOOL Steam Castle Steampunk Case Review. And if you look at the photos of it, it is one of those products that you are either going to go, oh, it's wonderful, or you're going to look at it and go, what? It's kind of got this sort of squid action off the top. There you go. If you're drilling on that, so there's 4 things on the top, and there's the grill on the front, and the side grills, and the buttons, and the USB ports on the side, which I'm actually kind of getting into the more I think about it. One of the funny things about the review up on HardOCP is they show the case, the box the case came in, which apparently, the angry UPS / FedEx / obscure delivery company driver had thrown the thing down a flight of stairs. You're going to be working a little bit, I think, in some ways to get things inside of the case. Steve at Hard SUV points out that, you know, it's, quote, a bit larger than your average Mini ITX/MATX chassis, but it's interesting because you mount looks like you mount the motherboard horizontally inside of the case, and then you're going to be running, oh, there it is. Yes. That is the box of doom. If you click over to page 4, interior and cooling, you'll see the layout of the case is really interesting because you're essentially laying the motherboard down flat or horizontally, which it's a Mini ATX motherboard, micro ATX motherboard. There's plenty of space inside of there, but it reminds me. Do you remember I want to say Silverstone or somebody? You know, do you remember stuffing cases inside of there where you basically have a bunch of big bars? So there's plenty of room compared to older, smaller cases that would lay the motherboard horizontally. There's a lot of room inside this to work with, but it's going to be a little more challenging to do cable routing and stuff compared to like that NZXT. But what's really interesting is when you kind of look at it completely assembled, they did some interesting things. The biggest thing is there's a big old 200 millimeter intake fan, and then an exhaust fan in the top rear. And they do a smoke test, which is kind of like a smoke pencil that you would use for testing to see if there are air leaks in your house when you're securing the thermal envelope on the house. But the airflow looks really, really good. And their audio testing says it's fairly quiet because they have this big, slow moving 200 millimeter fan inside of there. So I think it's interesting. The design, it's neat to see a case that is very distinctively designed that is not impossible to work with. If you like to put your case on the floor, you're probably not going to like the location of the power and the reset button and the USB ports on the side of the case. It's compelling, and it's like $90 up on Newegg. So another case in that price range. Really interesting. Kind of reminds me of an anime character or robot.
I definitely fall into that second category of instead of oh.
And you didn't even see it in the red or the yellow version.
Yeah, this would I could see how some people would like this. It does not fall into my wheelhouse, I guess I'll say.
I'm seeing your grumpy cat face coming on. Intel Compute Stick pre-order has started, just in time for in case you didn't. If you weren't compelled to order the Chromebit last week or to try to, get your Chromebit going on, the Bay Trail Windows 8.1 $149 Intel Compute Stick is in pre-order. First previewed back at CES. The thing I love about that is if you look at the hand holding the compute stick, you see giant hole. Well, not giant holes, but compared to most HDMI sticks. Boy, look at all that room to let heat out of that case.
Well, it's a small case.
It is, and it's it's an x86 quad core, 2 gigs of RAM, 32 gigabytes of storage on board. Currently not powered by the HDMI ports. You're going to need to run a micro USB power line into it, which is very Raspberry Pi of them. A USB Type A port, a micro SD card slot, 802.11n built in, which is a much nicer feature than the Raspberry Pi. So essentially, it is a relatively inexpensive Windows computer, $149 on Amazon or Newegg, with Windows 8.1, $109 if you want to rock the Linux on that, which it could be a really interesting like XBMC box.
We were talking about this earlier, Ken and I, and this is, it's kind of in the category of Chromecast or Kindle Fire TV stick or something like that. But what those two things have that this does not is kind of a built-in default interface that is meant to be a 10-foot interface, something that's usable from a TV. It's got a remote control on your phone or an external remote or something like that. This is going to be a Windows machine that you're going to need a keyboard and a mouse for. It has Bluetooth embedded, so you won't have to have wires or anything. But, is this something where you're going to want to install Plex on so you can access the multimedia in your network? And then I think Plex will still give you, you can use ESPN and Hulu and Netflix apps through that, right? So we're expected to get one of these in, and we're going to mess around with some of those options as well in terms of, can you just buy one of these in a like a inexpensive 1080p TV and kind of have a whole package ready to go that's easy for streaming media if you're like a cord cutter type person.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's going to make the performance of the new MacBook, look spectacular. And I'm not trying to diss the Atom processor on that, but yeah, and comparing it to a Chrome stick, there should be a lot more oomph in there for you to play with. And obviously the option to do a Linux operating system, a Windows operating system. I mean, you think about it, like Windows 8.1 is what, like $110 for an OEM version. So you're getting a, 2 gigabyte Atom PC with 32 gigs of storage and an HDMI output for $40 more. So if you look at it that way, it starts to look like a bit of a bargain. So, and I also noticed, completely sold out, and they don't know when it's going to be available on Amazon.com, and they're looking at May 1st for the Windows 8.1 stick, and the 31st for the Atom stick, May 31st for the Atom stick. And basically, Newegg is listing them both as being sold out and new stock the beginning or tail end of May. And Amazon just says currently unavailable, and we don't know when or if this item will be back in stock. So one of those may be more honest than the others. You can name your judgment on that. Sure. I think the chat room has gone down, or I've done something terrible. But
it's possible that it's both. I still see it going. So
must be me. Yep. What's going on with the ASUS MG279Q, Mr. Shrout?
So this is a monitor that we first saw at CES, and it was interesting because when we saw it, it wasn't associated with FreeSync. It's not a G-Sync monitor, but it was listed as having support for DisplayPort 1.2a plus in the adaptive sync standard. And at the time, it was one of the few that was an IPS screen with 120 hertz refresh rate, had very good build quality like the ROG Swift did. And there was, I don't want to say there was confusion, but it seemed a little odd that there was this monitor that clearly supported variable refresh, but it didn't have the NVIDIA branding and it didn't have the AMD branding. So at the time, we basically went to AMD and said, hey, ASUS has got this monitor. Are you going to support it? And they said, well, for whatever reasons, it's not going to be part of the FreeSync program right now, but as long as they correctly support the adaptive sync standard, we're not going to block any displays that do that. So if they integrate it correctly, then yes, it will work with our hardware. So like, okay, great. So we thought we were just going to have this kind of vendor agnostic, but still would only likely work with AMD's technology monitor out there. And we kind of, lost track of it for a little bit. It was supposed to be out in the first quarter. Clearly, it's April now, so that didn't happen. But we did see on Twitter that AMD announced that, hey, this is now part of the FreeSync brand. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see kind of the announcement there. And actually, it's interesting because it talks about it being a FreeSync monitor. It still has a 2560 by 1440 resolution to it. But now the maximum refresh rate has been bumped from 120 hertz to 144 hertz based on the specifications that they list there in their like little promo image. So that's kind of interesting, right? That's kind of a major specification to suddenly change. And we don't see any listing about what the minimum variable refresh is, which is also one of the more important things you would like to know about this display. So it's an interesting turnaround, right? It wasn't a FreeSync monitor. Some time passed. Something clearly happened. Something changed, I believe, fundamentally in the architecture of the monitor, where it suddenly jumped from a 120 to a 144, and now it will be branded as a FreeSync monitor. So I don't know if that means a controller changed inside or some partnership change between ASUS and AMD. I don't really know exactly what the story is behind it, but it looks to me, just again, that I'm only basing it on the time I spent with it back in January, and that was probably only 10 minutes. But it seemed to be one of the better build quality monitors that we had seen. Like the ROG Swift the G-Sync monitor feels like a high quality monitor, right? It's got a TN display, but it feels like the construction of it is very nice. This is more along those lines compared to something like the Acer Predator that's been out. They're kind of known to be a little bit flimsier, a little bit lighter, not as nice to sit on your desk. So this could be good news for AMD that they have a high quality solution that will support the FreeSync brand. And we'll just kind of continue to follow along and see when this is going to be available, and if they've made any changes to maybe kind of lower that minimum variable refresh, after the discussions that that Alan and I had and talked about in that story and on the video that went up a couple of weeks ago comparing G-Sync and FreeSync. I still think AMD needs to address that, but I don't know if they have in any capacity. But this monitor was kind of like the darling of the show from CES in terms of displays because it was fairly inexpensive. It was listed at $599 when they talked to us about it before. For an IPS high refresh variable refresh display, that was $200 less than the comparable G-Sync monitor. So if it still has that price advantage when it actually ships, that could be a big plus for AMD and people that are interested in FreeSync.
Good to know.
Yeah.
If you are running a Samsung Galaxy Note 4/Edge, and Nexus 6, a Sony Xperia Z4, a Z4 tablet, a Z3 compact, Z3 tablet compact, Z2 tablet, Motorola Droid Turbo Moto X 2014, HTC One M9, HTC One M8, One Remix, aka the Verizon Mini 2, Desire I, LG G Flex 2, Xiaomi Mi3, Mi4, Mi Note, and more, you should be excited about the Aki Quick Charge 2.0 10,000 milliamp hour portable external battery fast charger, which essentially uses Qualcomm's Quick Charge 2.0 technology, or is capable, is licensed and certified to use Qualcomm's Quick Charge 2.0 technology, which, and I quote, charges compatible devices up to 75% faster than a standard charger. UL listed, requires a Quick Charge 2.0 certified adapter. And by the way, we'll work with all of your standard USB devices also. Did you get a chance to get hands-on with this, Ryan?
I did not. I just ordered it today.
Okay.
But I loved the idea. So I have a Droid Turbo that has quick charge support, but all the external batteries I've ever used just charge it at the normal kind of slow rate.
Sure.
What I like about this device is not only will it charge your phone at the quick charge rate, but you can charge the battery itself at the quick charge rate, right? So you can quick charge your quick charger, so you can quick charge your quick charge capable phone when you're on the road.
I was very sad to realize that my slightly beat up but still semi-functional Moto G apparently is not on the quick charge list, much to my deep and abiding sadness.
And it's only $30, right? Because there are a lot of, if you buy the Motorola branded just the charger, I think it's like $45. So in this, you get a charger with the battery, and then it seems like a great deal. Now I will say I haven't bought it or used it yet. It will be here tomorrow, so I'm going to be gone next week. So I wanted to take it with me, and I will obviously be able to try it out and use it and see if it actually holds up to that. So I'll report back next time we're on and tell you whether or not it's worth $30 or not. It's hard to imagine it not being worth $30 because it is still it's a 10,000 milliamp hours. Yeah. So it's still a healthy battery size.
Yeah. No, it was interesting because I was looking. Both you and I pretty regularly use a bunch of Anker's charging products, and I was looking at I carry around a 12,800 milliamp hour Astro3 from Anker. Yeah, I mean mostly because I started carrying it when I was using a particularly vicious in terms of power consumption oh my goodness
tablet, phone, watch.
Well, no. Do you remember when you used to actually have to carry a discrete box to connect to wireless internet?
Yes,
it's just like there's a brain.
MiFi's.
Thank you. MiFi being a particularly hideous example. Sorry, there was a 3-year-old and vomiting, and I'd also like to point out for the chat room, I am back in. It was a Chrome issue. oddly enough, moving to Internet Explorer, I'm allowed back in the chat room. So apparently it's time for me to clear the corrupted cache on my Chrome installation. But the reason I went on this long, divergent side spiel, which is kind of a theme for me today, is, you may want to be thinking about something like that Anker Astro3 if you do not have, if you don't find the need to charge 75% faster particularly compelling, you might want to go with something else simply because you will have more ports and you can connect multiple devices simultaneously. Sure. Although I may be the only person on the planet that's ever charged 3 USB items simultaneously on any battery, much less an Anker Astro3. It's been pretty bomb-proof, and 12,800 milliamp hours will really get you through a bad week at CES.
I travel with an Anker 6-port plug-in adapter, right? So when I get to the hotel, plug it in. I've got 6 USB ports. It's like, anybody with me, you can plug in your phone here. I need to plug in my watch and my phone and my tablet. I need 3 of those ports. That leaves 3 for you. You guys fight over it.
Do you use the? Are you using the 60 watt or the 40 watt? Or my
I think I don't know about we're using the 40. I know I have the 40.
Yeah, I think the 40 is the one that I have at home, and I bought that out of pocket. It's particularly amazing if you're charging a bunch of small drone batteries like Hubsan batteries, because you can charge 4 or 5 batteries simultaneously if you have the adapters. That's good, yeah. It's a very happy making device. Oh my goodness. Twitch at twit.tv is the email address if you have a question for us. I apologize. I forgot to cut and paste the tweet that asked this, but we essentially had someone wanted to know if it would be worthwhile to turn the Intel compute sticks into sort of a mini supercomputer, like when people took a half dozen Raspberry Pis and bolted them together. And I will say it probably makes about as much sense as bolting together Raspberry Pis. It would be an intellectual exercise of fun and joy. But, buy a Core i7 if you want a bunch of performance. It would be a fun exercise, but I don't think you get a particularly compelling performance experience out of it. However, if you're looking for an excuse to play around with your Linux supercomputer, DIY supercomputer skills, it will certainly be an experience, to say the very least. my favorite email
that was
in a long time.
That was at Pizza Cube that asked us that question. So I did have it here at the bottom of our notes. So yeah, thanks for the idea, but no, please don't do that.
Well, do it for the unbridled joy of doing it, but don't do it because you need a supercomputer.
True.
My favorite email address from a long time, an email from the Northwest somewhere, says, I'm looking for the best bang for the buck for a video viewing laptop. I want to view streaming content, physical Blu-ray, and files ripped from my DVDs, MP4s mostly, some MKV, a few WMV. I do not need 4K capability. The online content is not there. HDMI 1920 by 1200. From the Blu-rays and the DVD files is fine. Plus, I don't really trust a laptop screen to provide a good 4K experience. Oh, and portable. Thanks. If all you're going to be using it for is viewing video, my first thought would be get a tablet. Simply because, tablets in a lot of ways are much more convenient for viewing video, simply because you have the screen, you stare at the screen is in your hand, there's a touch screen for controlling or moving between your files and stuff. There's nothing particularly compelling about the keyboard. If all you're using it for is viewing video, skip the keyboard and actually go buy a tablet. And, I think you'll be extremely happy with 1080p video on most of the certainly the premium tablets and most of the less expensive ones. You're not going to get a 13-inch or 15-inch screen on a tablet, which may impact your decision. And if you need to use it for regular computing, you probably want a full keyboard and not a tablet with a Bluetooth connection. But generally speaking, tablets are amazing for consuming video, and pretty much all the 1080p tablets, certainly like Windows Windows tablets or the Android tablet should be able to deal with your file formats, ... You may need to transcode some of them, especially some of the weirder MKV and stuff like that. But in terms of MPEG-2, MPEG-4 video, pretty much everything should be able to play that without too much trauma, at least if you're spending more than $100 for it. Once you get into that $300 tablet range, you should be good to go. But I mean, it's amazing. The Raspberry Pi does a great job playing 1080p video because the Raspberry Pi actually isn't rendering the video. A subset of the chip, a special video rendering chip on the Raspberry Pi is handling that. If you want to be able to play Blu-rays on a portable device, you're going to rip them and transfer them. I almost feel like, if you're not in your house streaming over Wi-Fi, the biggest challenge in a lot of cases is having enough space if you have a lot of video content. Gareth emails about too much stuff on the motherboard. He says, thanks for the show, always entertaining and informative. Thank you, Gareth. Notice it does not say there's a good enunciation on the podcast. My question is about peripheral devices plugged into motherboards, and if there's a way to know if I'm asking too much of my board. I've looked around to see if there's information on the maximum draw for my board or boards in general, and thus far come up blank. Recently, my USB ports have been failing. I'll boot up, and my keyboard and mouse are inoperable, as are any other devices plugged into the USB 2 ports on my motherboard. I've been getting into Windows by unplugging the keyboard and mouse, plugging them into the two USB 3 ports on my board, NEC controller, logging in, going to the device manager where Windows indicates a problem with the USB 2 controller, removing the USB devices, and then reinstalling the drivers. It's kind of cumbersome and annoying. It sounds like it. Additionally, most times when I start up my PC, I hear a loud click multiple times, like there's some sort of electrical switching going on. I've been starting to wonder if I've just got too much plugged into my board. Here's what I've got, and this is a healthy list. An ASUS P67 Pro board running an i7 2600 overclocked to 4.4 gigahertz, 16 gigs of G-Skill DDR3, a GTX 780, SSD, HDD, Intel CT PCI Express NIC, ASUS DSX sound card, keyboard and mouse with lots of LEDs, so I'm guessing relatively high power draw, question mark, a Logitech webcam, Razer Tiamat headphones listed because they're powered by a USB 2 plug, UPS because it's another USB port, USB card reader in the drive bay, plus sometimes USB DAC and nice headphones. Hi, Patrick. It's a SCHIIT Fulla, which is pronounced like the thing that you don't say in front of your mother when you've left poo somewhere. I like it a lot. You should take a listen sometime. I actually just bought one of their preamps, which is a fantastic piece of engineering for $50. 340 millimeter fans plus the CPU cooler. Again, it's more power. So there's a lot plugged into this thing is what I'm saying. I'm also running this off a measly 620 watt Antec HCG PSU, but my draw from the wall never seems to get over 400 watts. So I figure that's fine. Although I appreciate on paper, that's pretty close to the max for the power supply. Could I be seeing these problems because of the number of devices I plugged into the board, or should the board be able to handle all this? I was considering ordering a powered USB 2 hub to take some of the load off and removing the PCI Express NIC because I only use it intermittently for a distant network for VMs to interact with other hardware. Am I wrong that the power supply is inefficient and I should get a bigger one, or is this an indicator of impending motherboard failure and I should start saving up to replace the board and CPU? Ouch! At least in that case, I get the NVMe compatibility for future upgrades. An ellipse and into the land of question answering. The clicking makes me think that maybe there's some issues with your power supply. The driver reloading to fix it makes me think there's issues with your operating installation. The simplest, in terms of diagnostics, go to Amazon, search for powered USB hub, go to the one that's got like 1,200 reviews, that's 4 stars or higher, and buy a powered USB hub, and then plug all of your USB stuff into the powered USB hub. That will quickly figure out whether or not it is a power on the USB bus issue. And I'm laughing because, I was literally in the hour or so before we started the podcast today, I reloaded all of the USB drivers and chipset drivers onto this ECS motherboard on my sub $400 gaming machine over here I've been using, just so I could get all of the USB ports to function. But I've only had to do that once since I completely rebuilt this machine. You should not be having to do this over and over again. So, weird things failing are often the power supply. If you think you're stretching the USB power source a little too thin, and you may be with that list of things on there, I would start by getting a powered USB hub. and connecting your devices to the powered USB hub. And if that doesn't fix it, then I would probably buy a new power supply, because you're probably going to want a new power supply if you have to buy a new motherboard and CPU.
That all seems reasonable. I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
The clicking, I assume that's a new sound as well. There should be nothing on your motherboard that clicks. Unless you have a fan on there that's not starting or something like that. There shouldn't be anything on the motherboard that clicks. So that's probably in the power supply side. That is a huge list of things for to be running off of those USB ports. Especially, I'm looking back, it's a P67 motherboard. And it didn't, it was that designed for high power draw, like some of the quick charge ports that came on motherboards shortly thereafter. I don't really remember. I think going with the powered hub is a good start, and that's probably your least expensive troubleshooting option as well, is to go with that, see if it works. If it doesn't work, then you can either return it, or, hey, you've got a nice powered USB hub to use for your next system, whatever that happens to be. Even if you don't buy a hub, just like try unplugging everything except the keyboard and mouse, right? If you do that, does it boot up correctly, right? Maybe that's even less expensive, as it turns out, to try, is to just unplug everything that's not necessary. Take out. I don't think your network card, your add-in card, like through a PCI Express bus, is going to affect that. There's going to be fairly separate. So I wouldn't imagine that would be the case, but unplug everything else except your keyboard, mouse, and if it still does it, I don't think it's a power issue. I think it's a failing component issue of some kind. And I would actually lean towards motherboard, not power supply, because power supply is just kind of like, if the processor's getting power and the GPU's getting power, it seems highly unlikely that it's not able to pass it through to the USB portions of the motherboard. So,
I am ashamed that it did not occur to me to just unplug everything but the mouse and keyboard.
It took me a while. It took me a while.
I am the master of cheap on this show. Yeah. And by the way, Pizza Cube, aka Cubicle, says making render farms out of a bunch of Intel compute sticks worth doing. Render farm supercomputer, it's basically something you need to do a whole lot of parallel processing. I'm just gonna venture to say no. As an intellectual exercise, yes, but as an actual, I need to render stuff fast, first of all, you're gonna be waiting till May to get them, and second of all, I think by the time you bought a bunch of them, you could probably buy the parts and build a fairly badass Core i7 box. Interesting note in the chat room. Almost Working says, I like a Chromebook, Patrick. Plus, you can run Chrome OS or Linux fun stuff and cheap as an alternative way to watch video. And a couple of new Chromebooks have come out that should be interesting.
The problem with that is you're going to have storage issues on that device as well. Right. Unless you want to carry an external drive with you.
But you have the cloud, and the cloud can store everything.
No, I just like Google Play is trying to get me to purchase the $89 digital version of the Star Wars 6-movie set. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna purchase. I don't buy movies online. I'm either streaming them or I'm gonna own a physical copy. I don't know. It's hypocritical of me because I buy crap on Steam all the time, but it just feels odd for some reason.
Well, Steam's different. I don't know why.
We'll just go with that.
Yeah, let it go, man. Yeah, no, I was laughing. There's Paul Thurrott did a really good write-up where he talked about, how Star Wars is finally going digital, and a bunch of people are like, what about the DVDs and the Blu-rays? Those are zeros and ones. But I thought it was really curious that Disney's now bringing Star Wars out on Amazon,
iTunes,
Google Play, and iTunes.
Amazon. Yeah, it's weird.
Although Amazon Instant is like $10 less for the bundle of all the flicks than everybody else's, which I thought was pretty funny. If you're wondering, HBO Now so far has worked perfectly. I think the big test of the service is going to be Sunday night when Game of Thrones Season 5 fires up. That we will find out if it suffers some of the indignities that the dish sling suffered during the March Madness basketball tournaments. Although I got to say, with MLB Advanced Media, building all the back end for HBO Now. I think it should be pretty stable. If you're wondering when you will get it on something other than an iPhone, an iPad, or an Apple TV, the answer is in about 87 days, give or take, where I think it will explode everywhere. So in some ways, it may have been I don't know if Apple cut them a check or if HBO wanted to start with a very tight, manageable audience for this new service.
You mean the largest possible audience? I would say definitely a check. If it is available on Sling TV as well, right?
Right. Yes.
That's like it's a little bit different because it's a pay service, and then you pay more for HBO on top of it. But it is available on Sling TV. I think it was available last week or something like that on Sling TV. So,
it came out on Sling TV April 9th.
Hey, that's today.
Yeah. So it's $15 on top of Sling's $20 subscription. But in the case of the Sling TV, you get the linear live HBO channel, and then you also get you choose the videos when you want to watch them. Right. I got to say, so far the videos all look fantastic, which you would expect. And of course, all of HBO's stuff looks flawless.
They have always done a good job with that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're in the television world, if you're thinking about shopping for a new television, the SUHD, the 2015 SUHD televisions that we saw at CES from Samsung are shipping. Some of the new LG, 2015 LG HD TVs or UHD TVs are shipping, and the E-Series from Verizon are all shipping. I was talking to Robert Heron earlier today about that. So those are coming in a big way. And while I'm talking about video and hardware, the Roku 2 and 3 got an upgrade. It's interesting. Voice search is now available on the Roku 3. The Roku 2 loses the cool has a audio jack in it, remote control, but gets a processor upgrade. So the Roku 2 should now be as fast as the Roku 3. And if you've been looking at your television and thinking, wow, insert name of television manufacturer here has not upgraded the crappy software in my television for a couple of years, go buy a Roku or go buy an Apple TV. But if you buy an Apple TV, beware that everybody's pretty well convinced that there will be a new Apple TV heading into the holiday season. It will not do 4K, but there aren't that many 4K televisions. Anything you can tease about what's coming up next in the near future on the place known as PCPer.com?
We did some more testing with the Intel 750 series SSD in terms of compatibility across like a dozen different motherboards and platforms. Oh, wow. Did a quick installation video and story about like how you get this as a bootable device, and it's fairly straightforward on that. And then we have a couple of new Lenovo laptops in as well, the new X1 Carbon and the new T450S, which both use Broadwell. And that T450S has like I think if you get the biggest battery combination, it's like 97 watt hours of battery on that machine. So it seems like it'll just last forever. So I'm looking forward to playing around with that because I am a fan of long battery life devices.
Oh my goodness. We have a fun product roundup coming up on Tech Thing this week. The episode 14 of Tech Thing just went up today. We talk about technology and including a really hysterical series of conversations around if you need to. We had a viewer who needed to connect a garage that is 300 feet, like a steel garage that is 300 feet from his house, and was looking for Ethernet versus Wi-Fi advice. And boy, there are a lot of ways to run Ethernet. Although 300, depending on who you ask, either 300 feet is no problem. You're good to go to 500 feet, despite the fact that the Ethernet specs 328 feet. To, okay, put a power over Ethernet switch in the middle of that connection so it doesn't die out. To ZOMG 300 feet. Every time there's a lightning storm 2 states over, your Ethernet will go out. To just get Ubiquiti Air Max and do it wirelessly, and that's all even without considering the glory of trenching between places.
Doesn't sound like much fun.
Yeah, and we also created a bootable Windows 8.1 live disk, or Shannon did. It turns out to be a bit of a process.
Huh.
Yeah, well, not a lot of people want to run Windows Live off of a disk, apparently. Oh, my goodness. Ask Ask us a question. Twitch at twit.tv is the email address. At Ryan Shrout and at Patrick Norton on the Twitter. And I want to thank the chat room for participating and Internet Explorer for actually functioning with the chat room. Apparently, I have chromed my Chrome out. And we want to thank each and every one of you for listening or watching each and every week on Twitch. This Week in Computer Hardware. I was up with a yarking baby, so I am officially 3/4 exhausted. I'm going to stop speaking before I say something incredibly wrong that might cause Ryan to suddenly realize that he's made a horrible choice in becoming a father. I kid. I'm telling you, Ryan, the vomit is just a part of the awesomeness of being a father.
Well, you've got me stoked now. I don't know what else to say.
Woo! Wait till I tell you about meconium. That's it for this episode of Twitch. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.